I didn't have.
Is he just cheap or what?
No, actually, he's not. He's like $12 million. So he's really not cheap.
Did you get him on clearance?
You know who's cheap? The Haas's. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Grid. This is episode 14 of Grid Gals, and for those of you who have been with us for a little bit, aka our Grid Gang, you know how excited we were for the Monaco Grand Prix. This is an iconic race. There was a lot to look forward to here, a lot that we were nervous about if you're a Ferrari fan like me, and so we're really excited to recap this weekend for you.
I feel like the weekend itself, I was nervous for it, but then once the race got there, I was like, I forget how boring this race is.
Yeah. I mean, it's the glitz, it's the glamour, it's iconic, but it's not actually that exciting.
Yeah, there's a lot leading up to it. I feel like it'd be fun to be there watching it. I'm sure the atmosphere is amazing, but sitting at home watching on your TV, it's not the same effect. Although, there was a little bit of drama in this race, which kept it a little bit more exciting.
Little spice, little weather, a lot of heartbreak for some of us here, but overall, a pretty solid weekend.
I think it's one of the races where you don't have to have tickets to actually enter the track because there's so many houses, apartments, places to view, off your yacht in the harbor, so many areas you can actually view the race from itself. And I thought something that was interesting because the commentators had a lot to talk about with the rain delay on the actual race day was apparently they haven't re-signed the Monaco track to the F1 Grand Prix schedule. And so I think Monaco is trying to really show up to be like, hey, we're still relevant. People still want to come here. People still like this race just because it's not, as we've talked about on prior podcasts, as exciting for the fans, right? Right. There are much more interesting newer tracks that have come about, but I would hate to see Monaco go, even though, and we'll get into it, right? It's a street circuit, so really hard to pass on the track. It's still one of those races that I look forward to every year just because it is so iconic and so many people show up for it.
Oh, I would be devastated if Monaco fell off the calendar because I feel like it's one of the few that has been on consistently. There are other historic tracks that have come on and fallen off and come on and fallen off. I mean, there's so much history, and I think for the drivers, too, a lot of them have said, even though it's not the most interesting now, like you said, there's less overtaking, and it's a very old circuit. I think there's something for them with the prestige to win a Monaco Grand Prix and to truly be able to compete on the same track that the greats did back in the day.
I agree with that. I feel like I could live without it. I could definitely see it get dropped, I'm not gonna lie. But I think that I would be sad for the drivers because the drivers love to win at Monaco. A win at Monaco, I think, means more to drivers than winning anywhere else.
Yeah. And I would love to go to Monaco. As a fan, I actually think it would be my top race to go to simply because when you're actually at an F1 race, you can only see part of the track anyway.
Yeah.
Being at an F1 race is a very different experience than watching it on TV. And some of the other tracks and circuits that have, more dynamic, fast speeds or overtaking zones, okay, unless you're sitting right at that turn, you can't see it anyway.
Yeah.
Where Monaco, I just feel like the experience of being there, oh, God, that's on my bucket list for sure.
All right, Mary, when you get a yacht and can park it in one of the parking spots, which was $50,000 to $100,000 a day, make sure to remember me.
Yeah, I know. I'm totally going to forget my fellow grid gal. Ladies, if I get invited to the Monaco Grand Prix or any Grand Prix, you're obviously my plus twos. And here's a fun fact, actually. Even though Monaco is renowned for the Monte Carlo casino, technically, if you are a Monegasque citizen, you are not allowed to gamble in that casino.
That is a fun fact.
I'm sure they make an exception for sure. For Charles Leclerc.
I hope no one put any money on him.
Okay, well, as somebody who, we talked about this on our last episode, he's been on my fantasy team all season. I dropped him for this race. We can get into the full weekend before we discuss the results of fantasy, but a little bit of heartbreak. Less than prior years for the home team or home driver, but still disappointing.
Some may say the curse is broken, but...
I would not. I still feel like it's I feel like it's lightened, maybe, but not gone.
Not full broken.
Spoiler alert, he did finish the race, but I still think he's a little cursed at his home race. So I think with that, probably good to start the weekend from the top.
Practice?
Well, I think the most significant thing from practice was Danny Rick crashed in P2, so they had to rebuild his car, and someone else crashed.
I know other people had car trouble. A lot of people at least tapped the wall a couple times. I think people were really struggling with the new cars on this track because, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't the cars bigger now? I know the tires are.
Mm-hmm.
So, dealing with that issue, and a lot of people have trouble with Monaco anyway, and the new tires. I think it was a difficult practice session. A lot of the drivers were complaining about bouncing in the car. Even if drivers weren't dealing with the porpoising, I think just the bumpy road of Monaco left a lot of drivers uncomfortable in their cars. So other than that, I don't think anything super interesting happened during practice. Besides seeing the drivers struggle, nothing super crazy.
No, pretty run-of-the-mill.
Although some drivers did get in trouble with impeding. And I think we saw that in qualifying too. Because it's so hard to get over and have two cars side by side on the Monaco circuit, a lot of drivers were penalized. I think Sainz was penalized a couple €1,000 because he didn't get over for another car to pass or something fast enough.
Damn.
But I wonder, and that's something I think we will have to talk about when we do our part 2 of the beginner's guide, is the budget. Because I want to know if that eats into the budget for the teams.
Yeah, what's teams versus drivers' responsibility to pay up?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, still very unclear on that.
But other than that, I think qualifying's our next step.
And quali was spicy. It was quite the qualifying session.
I think notably when... And of course, I'm going to be the one to bring this up. I know it.
Our OG hater. We love you.
When they told Stroll that he was out in Q1, his scream, incredible.
Honestly, I need this sound clip to go viral. This is one of the funniest things I've heard all season. Honest to God. Lance Stroll. I was texting Jack watching qualify. I was like, I'm dying.
It was hysterical.
So for all of our fans who may or may not have watched quali, we got to give this bad boy a listen and just appreciate the sheer quality of his screech.
If I were him at this point in the season, I wouldn't have been particularly that shocked. If they had told me that I got first, sure, yes. But, it's not like they've been performing very well, consistently getting Q3, right? This is not uncommon. We expect at this point in the season to see the Williams, Aston Martins, kind of down towards the bottom.
Well, and you know what? Here is the plug for the episode. You can all go ahead and take a drink because Lance Stroll may have gotten out in Q1, but Sebastian Vettel took that little shit box and rode it all the way into Q3.
He did.
So that's not on the machinery this time. Lance Stroll he missed it. And my man Seb did not. He delivered, which honestly I'm shocked because that's just some damn good driving because that is not a damn good car. Anyway, plug over, but
I think a lot of the young drivers struggled.
yeah, and I think having experience on this circuit really pays dividends compared to some other circuit.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what else was interesting in qualifying.
I think I was shocked by Bottas's performance.
He was having trouble with his car.
Well, and here's another fun fact for our listeners who are into that. We've talked a lot about Bottas as a qualifier and the fact that he is now in the history ranks of one of the best qualifiers. He made Q3 appearances for 100 consecutive races in a row. That streak was broken a little bit earlier, but his streak of making it past Q1, I don't think he has missed a Q1 appearance since I believe 2017 is what they said, when this time, his time to get him into Q2 was like a tenth of a second. He almost missed getting into Q2, which, considering his streak of even just getting past Q1, would have been absolutely devastating. And, I know the Alphas were struggling.
They were very much so struggling. I know it was not just him, like the cars were too, but I was still shocked.
Yeah, Zhou Guan Yu, I think, and he continued to have issues throughout the weekend. That was one where Bottas just barely made it through, and thank God. And again, we love Bottas.
I was also really surprised by Ocon's performance, and I think the commentators were too. I think that man, we never really talk about him a lot, but he's consistently...
We kind of sleep on him.
We kind of sleep on him, and he did phenomenally well for how for us, not really giving him the time of day, or just most people not really giving much buzz about him, but the commentators were floored by his performance at Monaco.
And frankly, I feel like I should gas him up a little more. I've had him on my fantasy roster a couple times this season.
Really?
I didn't have
him. Is he just cheap or what?
No, actually, he's not. He's like $12 million. So, he's really not cheap.
Did you get him on clearance?
You know who's cheap? The Haas's. You know who
Dude, K-Mag, I don't want to talk about this race, but K-Mag has been doing some major work for my fantasy team.
Not this weekend.
I said I didn't want to talk about this race particularly, but before that, we talk about bang for your buck.
Yeah, usually K-Mag is that heavy hitter, big ROI. No, not there this weekend. Didn't show up. But before we get too down the fantasy rabbit hole, anything else for Q1?
I can't think of anything for Q1.
Everybody else that got dropped wasn't too much of a surprise. Oh, except for Gasly. Actually, that was a big surprise. I think.
Oh, and he was mad.
Yeah,
he stormed off.
Well, he was performing incredibly well in free practice, and so for him to perform so well in practice and then get dropped out of Q1, that was definitely a big surprise of the weekend.
I think he ran into traffic or something. I want to go back and read some stats on it, but I think a lot of those surprises, like Bottas and Gasly, were car issues and traffic issues, because I know timing for putting in flying laps during qualifying is really difficult, because I think as you watch it, you see them build and the laps get faster and faster, but it's difficult with all the cars out there because there's so much traffic and there's only so many places for those cars to move over to give someone a chance to get a flying lap. So
yeah, and the commentators definitely talked about that and the team's release strategies out of the pits.
Right.
And how they did kind of screw some people over, which some of it just comes down to time left on the clock and what are you going to do. But yeah, I think that might have been the case with Gasly.
So what happened in Q2?
I don't think there were too big of surprises with Q2. I will put in another plug here. Again, Sebastian Vettel, he made it all the way to Q3. So, based on the Aston Martin's performance, I would have been happy if he even made it to Q2. But made it all the way to Q3. So, that's who I was watching. The McLarens.
Don't.
The McLarens.
Well, we already talked about it. They had to do some rebuild to Daniel's car, but everyone was expecting something exciting to Daniel usually shows up for Monaco. It can be spicy some seasons. He's won before. I think people were expecting this to be a turnaround time for him. It just didn't pan out.
I actually wasn't expecting it to be, because this track is so difficult for the drivers, and I know he likes the track, but I think he only really liked it when he was driving the Red Bull and felt really comfortable in the car. So I didn't actually think he would do...
I didn't either.
Super well. I was hoping for your sake.
I was hoping, but
yeah.
People were going off about him potentially turning things around.
Also the pressure of he kind of has to start turning it around.
Yeah, we can't talk about this. We can't talk about that this week.
No.
Next week, we have an off week, we can get into that whole shebang. But yeah, I agree. It is a little bit frustrating as a fan as well, and I'm not even trying to empathize with what he's feeling right now, but it is frustrating week after week seeing such drastic results from even what we saw last season, I would say, to some extent.
Well, I think just such a gap between him and Norris. I think that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. We can get into it on another episode about like how we're feeling about drivers' performance this season and such, and contracts and some of the comments that have come out about him specifically. But yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us were really that shocked. I wasn't especially shocked by that. But I mean, it still hurts, you know?
Oh, Jack.
Okay, well, maybe on to some lighter.
Yeah, we'll move on to Q3.
Yeah. Thank you. Which I'll take this time to talk about Checo. Okay, but this is...
Will you now? We're talking about Checo? What?
This is the performance that I was wanting to see. Last episode we talked about this. I wanted to see...
God.
Listen.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
This is the pace that I was wanting to see, though, because Sainz and Leclerc have always been closest. So I said last episode, in the pace. And finally, I mean, Checo showed up. He performed the entire weekend. All the practices, he was faster than Max. Qualifying, he's been faster. The race, we'll get into. This is the type of pace that I wanted as part of a Red Bull team.
I just love sitting next to you, hearing these comments, and I'm like, am I sitting next to Catherine Patton or Helmut Marko right now? Because really, Red Bull should hire you, apparently.
If they want to put out a sponsorship, it's fine.
Lord knows you drink enough energy drinks.
But I was really excited with qualifying. It was a good performance. I was a little disappointed because there was a crash that stopped Max from getting his second flying lap. Mm-hmm. But I still think Checo honestly would have topped it.
Who else got ensnared in that incident?
Yeah, so Checo spun, hit the wall, and then Sainz came around the corner, couldn't stop fast enough, and Sainz also hit Checo. Sainz ended up second. Checo was third. Verstappen fourth. Leclerc tightly held pole. I mean, he was...
Oh, he crushed it. Absolutely crushed it. And he's gotten pole. What, the last 2 races at Monaco, I believe? Granted, he got pole and crashed, or got pole and... The Leclerc curse, is this where we talk about it now?
I think so.
So for our listeners, for the grid gang who's new to Leclerc and Monaco, it's his home race. A lot of pressure, obviously, but has struggled with finishing. And he has never, up until this year, finished an F1 race at Monaco for a variety of reasons. Whether it was a crash earlier in the weekend, an incident during the race, he has never actually finished a race at his home track. And so we've talked about it a little bit. You know, there seems to be a curse plaguing him. He has gone on to set pole here multiple times without ever completing this race. And so he set pole again this weekend, which, you know, was pretty expected. He was performing incredibly well all weekend. But even with pole going into the race on Sunday, as a Ferrari fan, I was still certainly nervous. Well, before we get into the in-depth race recap, I will just quickly run through the results of the race. So we did have 3 DNFs here, and thank God Leclerc was not one of them. But we did have, unfortunately, both of the Haas's. Kevin Magnussen in 20th, Mick Schumacher in 19th, and Alex Albon from Williams in 18th. In 17th place, we had Yuki Tsunoda for AlphaTauri. In 16th, we had Zhou Guanyu for Alfa Romeo. 15th, we had Nicholas Latifi racing for Williams. In 14th place, Lance Stroll racing for Aston Martin. In 13th place, Daniel Ricciardo racing for McLaren. In 12th, we had Esteban Ocon racing for Alpine. In 11th, we had Pierre Gasly for AlphaTauri, and this was quite impressive considering his qualifying position of 17th. He actually did move up 6 spaces. In 10th, Sebastian Vettel for Aston Martin. In 9th, Valtteri Bottas for Alfa Romeo. And in 8th, Lewis Hamilton for Mercedes. 7th, Fernando Alonso for Alpine. 6th, Lando Norris for McLaren. In 5th, we had George Russell for Mercedes. In 4th, heartbreakingly, we had Charles Leclerc for Ferrari, and we will get into that, believe me. In 3rd place on the podium here, we did have Max Verstappen from Red Bull. In 2nd place for Ferrari, we had Carlos Sainz, and our winner of the Monaco Grand Prix was none other than Sergio, aka Checo Perez, for Red Bull.
Whoop.
Leclerc did finish. He somewhat broke the curse, but to start pole at a race where pole is very crucial, because it's incredibly hard to overtake, to end up 4th was still a pretty devastating result, especially because, and I do want to make this kind of clear for our listeners, it wasn't Leclerc's fault.
It was not. That's what's the heartbreaking part. And I think it's easy to forget that. Because, like, we're watching the race and we can see all the positions and see how people are asking them to box. And, like, he had no idea, like, what was going on, the radar, none of that. He's just trusting his team.
Yeah, as drivers do. And it was team strategy. Truly came down to team strategy. That
You should explain how it happened.
So like we mentioned at the very beginning when we were kicking off the weekend, there was a weather component to this race. Essentially, it started raining on Sunday to the point where the race was actually delayed. I believe they went out and did, one lap before they called it, had a rain delay. And when they did restart the race, everybody was restarting on wet tires. And so as the race progressed, eventually the front runners came in and got switched by the teams to intermediate tires. However, on the Ferrari side, for Carlos Sainz, they switched him directly to hards and then brought Leclerc back in for a second tire change from inters to hards. And in that additional tire change, lost track position where he had been comfortably leading, was now in 4th place. And that was one of those where kind of hard to swallow because he, as a driver, didn't do anything wrong. You're trusting your team. I know weather makes things dicey, but I think Ferrari kind of messed that call up for sure. And it's so hard to get that track position back that once Red Bull came out with the undercut, you don't have as much opportunity to overtake on the track and regain that position.
So I'll play a little devil's advocate on this instead of Jack this episode. I think that actually Carlos
you'll
Sainz...
play devil's advocate because it's Red Bull. So let's be clear on that.
Well, wait till what I have to say because it's actually for Carlos Sainz's benefit. Mm-hmm. So I think Carlos Sainz actually just showed his driver's strength in making the call because he decided that he wants to go from the wet tire to slicks. And then Charles Leclerc just followed team orders, but I do think that the drivers know best on the track what they can drive with and what tire they should be on. So I think actually Sainz had the best call. That should have put him even higher. I think he could have won. What he said is that he ran into traffic, but...
I would say yes and no, because I think part of the issue, too, was the double stack. I think had they not brought Leclerc back in with Sainz already in the pits, which that's not up to the drivers.
Right.
That's a team call.
Agreed.
To bring them in on top of each other. You're in the pits longer than needed because unless you can execute a double stack, which is bringing in both cars to pit at the same time, so you'll have one car pit. Again, the pit stops are pretty quick, but you have one car pulling in and pulling out, and it has to be absolutely seamless in every aspect for it to truly work well. It's kind of a risky move anyway.
So maybe they should take notes from Red Bull because they did pretty well in the race.
Well, so I think I do agree what you're saying about the driver call, but I think ultimately the double stack setup, that's outside of Leclerc's control.
I agree, but I don't think that added that much time to that pit stop. I think it was the pit stop in general that added time because he had just come in for inters. But who's to say? I think he had to be on slicks eventually. I think he probably could have stayed out in inters a little bit longer. Very unfortunate, I think, the Leclerc curse still lives on in some sort.
I don't know what's the curse. He finished the race. Like, he was still in fourth.
Okay, yeah, but like, to go from first to fourth?
But it's like a very clear error in the team. It's not like something that Leclerc did himself, you know?
Yeah, that's why he's cursed. It's not
But
just
it's
he's
not
a
the curse.
bad
He finished
driver.
the race.
Yeah.
Like, he still finished the race. Like,
It's
that
the
to me is
same-
breaking the curse.
He crashed Niki Lauda's car.
I know, but it wasn't during the race. He actually finished. He got
Yeah, but
quite
that's
a bit
just
of points.
he's
like,
cursed at Monaco.
Like, bad
the
things
car
happen.
itself broke when he crashed Niki Lauda's car. That wasn't even him. It's not his fault. The same thing.
but I think he
it's
broke
his
the
team's
curse.
fault.
Like, but like, curse was he could never finish a race at Monaco, and he finished the race comfortably. Like, he got a lot of points. Like, taking it outside the fact that Leclerc's been doing really well this season.
A lot of points. He's still second in the Drivers' Championship. These are crucial points.
I'm not saying that it wasn't unfortunate. I'm just saying, like, in my mind, he broke the curse. But I think it does. Catherine, I agree with you. Like, Carlos Sainz definitely showed his skill in this instance of not obeying team orders and the fact of them telling him to box earlier. I think he made a good call there. Yeah, so I want to back it up for a second. So because it had started raining and they had made the call to start the race, the drivers went out. We're starting in the formation lap. What I thought was really funny was there were two drivers that ended up crashing into the wall once they brought the drivers back onto the track. Latifi, to no one's surprise, crashed into the wall. Stroll did not crash as hard. He kind of like lightly tapped the wall, but both of them did have to pit right after that first reemergence of the lap to get some changes.
And wasn't that even just the formation lap? I don't think that was a real lap yet.
It wasn't even a real lap yet. That was the best part, was the rain had been quite intense. People were getting back on the track, and like Latifi had quite no one's surprised, right? And like, there is, to his credit, there are some very tight turns at Monaco, but it's like, are you kidding me? Like, we're not even starting yet. Like, we're getting everyone onto the track, and very, very funny.
And then they almost crashed in the pits.
Yes.
Latifi and Stroll. Well, Stroll never actually checks his mirrors, but I don't know if that was the issue here.
So, fun fact, you do have mirrors. You can use them.
Just like any car you drive, should probably check those.
Well, I think the big incident and the big crash that was honestly kind of scary to watch, and we will caveat this by saying, first and foremost, driver is okay, walked away, is fine, but Mick Schumacher, and I think it was lap 27, had a pretty serious incident, and to the fact that the chassis actually broke and the car more or less split in half.
$1 million in damages.
Oh my god.
Haas is bankrupt.
Jesus.
I think the most insane part of that crash to me is it happens. It's obviously a very intense crash. Already it's, because it's a street circuit, there's not a lot of great barriers on the track. They pan over and K-Mag is just on the sidelines. And at that point, I had not known that he had retired from the race. The commentators did not even know. And it was like one of those things where it's like, well, because my first reaction is the Haas goes into the wall. I'm like, which one is it? Is it Schumacher or is it Magnussen? And after that, like, of course, check, he's okay, all that stuff. But they were like, wow, we didn't even realize that K-Mag retired. Like, what the heck happened? It's just been such an intense, like, first part of the race. Like, we had no idea he'd even retired the car.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't even see any replays.
No, they didn't. I think it was, I can't remember what exactly had happened, but it obviously wasn't something that involved a different driver. It was an incident.
And that was lap 27. Mm-hmm. The strategy call for Leclerc happened 23. And then everything after 27 was pretty boring.
Based on the severity of the crash, they did red flag the race, partially to fix the barriers, since it was pretty significant. But once they did restart, which was a rolling start, the race from then on out wasn't really that exciting. It was kind of what you expect from Monaco, with not a lot of overtaking, pretty standard. We didn't really see any other major incidents. Again, there were a couple drivers who continued to tap the barriers throughout, but nothing major. I think the one funny part, though, not really noteworthy, but kind of funny, was Alonso's battle with Hamilton. And so the Mercedes of Hamilton in 8th place had quite a bit more pace than Alonso's Alpine in 7th. But Alonso's just...
He was just trolling him.
He was having so much
hard.
fun. And he even said after, they're like, was it hard defending against Lewis? And he's like, no, not at all. But pretty much was just keeping him behind him because he could. I mean, had Lewis got in front of Alonso, you know, who knows? Maybe he would have been all over the back of Norris and causing problems, but Alonso actually cleared the way for Norris to pretty comfortably pit later for some softs and get the fastest lap.
Because I think there was at one point, there was about 15 laps that Alonso was really holding up the pack. And then when he realized that Ocon got the 5-second time penalty, then he started speeding it up so Ocon could move up, at least get 5 seconds between him and some cars. That was the other noteworthy incident, is that Ocon and Hamilton were battling back and forth. Hamilton was trying to get around Ocon at one point. Again, since it's Monaco, there isn't much to do, but Ocon ended up getting a 5-second time penalty for his maneuvers there.
Which was pretty significant considering how close the pack was running, you know, down in those places.
I know we're not usually big Mercedes fans on this podcast, but I do want to make a call out because the pace of the Mercedes was insane compared to the other cars during the actual race itself. Russell was keeping really good pace. I'm sure Alonso's skilled driving was keeping Lewis, and obviously a very frustrated Lewis from it's Monaco, right? Like you're not making a lot of moves on the track itself. But one thing that I didn't know that I did discover during this race was Russell is the only driver to finish in the top 5 of all races this season, which is pretty impressive. And with the pace of his car, I think it's going to be really exciting these next couple races. And depending on how things go, it might be a 3-way battle for the Constructors' Championship instead of the 2-way battle that's happening right now.
And he did keep that streak up. He did finish P5.
Jack's about to switch to Mercedes. I can feel it.
There's no way. She literally said her mom hates Mercedes because of us. Are you worried that, like, the McLarens are performing?
It's too mean.
I would switch to Ferrari before I switched to Mercedes. I mean, Marty kind of like half
She's
a Ferrari
just gonna
fan.
swap her hat out for a number 4 instead of a number 3 is really what's gonna happen.
I think I would switch to, honestly, like, let's say in the unfair world that Ricardo just, like, doesn't pan out this season, doesn't get on the track next year, I would probably switch to be a Sainz fan for sure.
I feel like that's not that much of a stretch.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to get another gal on the podcast.
Grow up.
Okay, so I watched this race with my family, and they all spread out their different allegiances. My brother, weirdly enough, was backing Latifi for the race. Which was,
Wait, what?
Sorry,
Did you see him crash into the wall? On the formation?
Never in my life have I met a Latifi fan, except for, like, I don't know, his family. Like, what?
I think, like, mainly because it's funny.
It's
And
not.
as soon as he said it, he crashed in the formation lap, which
Oh
was
my
just
God.
amazing. My dad actually backed Checo, which I expected.
Love Checo. That would be the other person I would consider. I would become a Sainz fan or a Checo fan.
Okay, thank you.
You need to learn Spanish.
No hablo español. Lo siento.
Oh, look at that.
That trip to Spain did you well.
Got my key phrases down.
Wait, who is your mom rooting for?
I mean, as a grid gal mom,
Was she Verstappen?
of course.
Oh my god.
Okay, so you're like, oh, my family spread out their allegiances. Everyone's rooting for Red Bull except for your brother who's rooting for Latifi as a bit. Like, come on.
Like, that's not a threat, Catherine. It's
That's
not
the
a threat.
support I needed.
Oh my god. Okay, I'm gonna become a Sainz fan.
Purely to spite Catherine.
But I was really happy to see Checo win this one. It's a great race. I think he deserved it.
He's 4th in the Drivers' Championship now, which is... I mean, there was a joke that he had made about something to Christian Horner about maybe signing his contract too early.
Yeah, and I think that's why they ended up announcing
Yeah.
that he signed on for Red Bull for 2024.
Yeah, there was a funny moment in the interview room where the interviewers called him out on it. Basically, he was caught on camera saying that to Christian. Like, wow, I signed too early after his victory. And they basically called him out and said, what are you talking about? Is that your contract? And him and Max are sitting there and they're kind of laughing slightly uncomfortably. And they're like, no, signing the champagne bottle on the podium.
Oh, my God.
And you're like, okay. And then, what do you know? It's been announced that Checo is extending with Red Bull for 2 more years. Maybe did sign a little too early. I'm sure it's still a good contract. But we'll do the deep dive in driver contracts around the summer break when we can get all of the spicy takes. But you can already start to see it bubbling up between, Sainz getting the extension, Checo getting the extension, the questions being called around Ricardo. We'll have a lot to talk about in a later episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he is now the most successful Mexican Formula One driver. This kind of solidified that for him.
Love Checo. Good for him.
He's like, what's not to love about Checo? Like, he's just such an easy person to like.
Jack, did you see the photo of his dad? I know how much you love Checo's dad.
I was waiting for them to pan. I didn't know if his dad had actually attended or what.
He didn't. But there was a photo of him that circulated holding the Mexican flag in front of the TV. I have to send it to you because he looked like teary-eyed.
His dad is my favorite, Formula One supporter. Like, his dad. Also, I loved when he got on podium for the Mexican GP last year. Mm-hmm. And, his son got to come with him, which was, the most precious thing.
It was cute.
Well, speaking of Checo's family, did you see that his wife gave birth?
Yes, I did. I don't know if we mentioned that, but...
I don't think we did. Mm-hmm. They welcomed baby Emilio into the Perez family, so...
Aww, I love that family.
We love Checo's dad and Checo as a dad.
I feel like that rounds out the race, though.
It really does. I think the last thing to call, if fans were confused, right, this was supposed to be a 78-lap Grand Prix, and once a race starts, and they do have some sort of delay, they have a time limit. So even if the race restarts at a certain point, they're not going to do the full laps of the race, and that's what happened in this instance, right? The delay was too long. They weren't going to be able to finish the race, so at one point you saw the lap marker turn to a time limit, and after the time runs out, the drivers finish that lap that they're on, and then that's the results of the race. So in some races, if they don't get over 3/4 of the race, or if they don't complete over 3/4 of the race, then they won't be awarded full points. But in this instance, they did cross that threshold, so the driver still got full points, but the full amount of laps was not finished for the race. So I don't think it would have changed the results that much at that point.
I don't know. Fans got shortchanged. 64 instead of 77 action-packed laps at Monaco.
Yeah, I think that was ideal distance there. We got, I feel like, 30 laps of some excitement. The rest of them, not so much. And that's all I needed. But I am excited for our next race, which is what, Jack?
The Azerbaijan Grand Prix, Baku. Very excited for that, and one of our favorites on the Grid Gals podcast. So that'll be in 2 weeks' time. So ladies, what are we talking about next week?
I think we're going to go ahead and give our listeners a little bit more education on Formula One. So we did do a Formula One for beginners a couple weeks ago, and we're going to do a part 2 of things you need to know. For example, this week, what does it take to earn full points in a race? These sort of things pop up. Safety cars. We'll touch a little bit maybe on more of the team dynamics. So a little bit more education around the things that we talk about from week to week.
So if you've liked what you've heard so far, you can visit our website, gridgals.com. We have links to all of our socials. And make sure you like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
And that's the checkered flag for this session. We'll catch you here on the grid next week.